This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to A Sharp Outlook on K4HD Radio and Talk or TV. I am Angela Sharp, your host. Our armchair discussions with industry experts will give you the steps, tools, and information to be successful in business and to prepare you to be your best self. Hello, and welcome to A Sharp Outlook. I am Angela Sharp, and today we're going to be talking about a very, very important topic, neurodiversity. There is support for neurodiversity. So what am I talking about? Neurodivergent refers to individuals whose brain functions, learns, and or behaviors are different from what is considered typical or neurotypical. This encompasses a range of neurological differences, including ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. It's important to note that neurodivergence, it is not a diagnosis, but rather a term describing a natural variation in how the brain operates. Neurodiversity is a concept that the differences are a natural part of human variation, similar to other forms of diversity like race, gender, ethnicity. Neurotypical considers individual brain function as the norm in society. Characteristics of neurodivergent individuals may experience unique emotional and behavioral symptoms, such as difficulties with social interactions, heightened anxiety, challenges with focus, or impulsivity and sensory sensitivities. Yet, they can often bring unique cognitive strengths, such as creativity, innovation, and specialized skill sets. The neurodiversity paradigm emphasizes that these differences are not deficits, but rather variations in human conditions and brain functions that should be recognized and respected. We're going to be talking about workplace neurodiversity training so that employers are bringing in these wonderful people to help with some of the cognitive challenges that are there and technology, that needs to be handled. They have those skill sets. And so we're going to be talking about that today with my guest from the Brain Charity. And today, Gregory Kearns is here to speak on behalf of the Brain Charity. He's the Brain Charity's lead associate trainer for neurodiversity in the workplace training. He has delivered workshops for participants from a wide range of industry, public, and third sector backgrounds, to high acclaim with many clients respecting the engaging way he brings content across. Gregory has worked with the Brain Charity for many years, and in 2023 represented the neurodiversity training on IT and business and program, Inside Neurology, Our Unique Brain. Greg brings a wealth of direct lived experience as a neurodivergent person with perspectives on both lifelong neurological condition and latter diagnosis in adulthood. This enables him to respond to the lived experiences of training delegates at the same time as speaking for best practices in workplace disclosure and workplace optimization. I would like to invite Gregory to join me right now and to talk about this important topic.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Angela.
Well, it's just wonderful to have you here. And I wanted to talk about the Brain Charity. It's a charity in the UK, the United Kingdom. Am I correct?
Yeah, 100%. We say we mostly function on a national level, so we support people in the UK. However, we have on occasion been supporting people internationally as well. It depends on what aspect in which we're supporting people and how successfully we can do that. When we're providing information, it's a little bit easier, because as we were talking before we were on air, Angela, the wonderful thing about technology is we can work remotely now. And so we have been successful in tuning people in other countries into services that are more locally provided for them, or providing special bits of information. As the Brain Charity, you listed a bunch of conditions that we might consider neurological conditions. There's over 600 different neurological conditions. And as we can imagine, even with individual conditions, there can be a massive variety of the kinds of support people need. And so what we tell people is we help people with every single one of those conditions. Some of those conditions are really common and lots of people know about them, and there's loads of different information out there that generally people find it quite easy to access. But we also support people with some of these rarer conditions, which only a couple people internationally actually have diagnoses of. So we cover a broad spectrum of support in both practical as well as across different conditions as well. So it can be an amazingly rewarding job, with also being quite busy and complicated as well.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, as I was meeting with you and Jane and different ones from the Brain Charity and doing some background, I understand you helping. I didn't even realize until I checked this out that there could possibly be 600 different conditions. But that just lets us know just how complex the brain is. And some of us just lack the information or an understanding of how the brain works. And so we've developed some type of idea or some kind of perspective about it that has been totally, completely wrong. And this is why, you being here, helping to help us all understand, that these are just differences in the brains. But, I may not be great at, doing art or something like that. Some people have artistic capabilities. I've bought guitars, pianos, different things. And I'm telling you, I don't care what I did, I could not learn how to play it. And so it's just how my brain works. Now, but give me a computer and some technology and some software, I can really work that. But I just don't have those things. Does that make me different? Well, it's just something that I'm not able to do. So it just lets us know that the brain just functions differently for people, and it's just hard to say what is typical. I just wanted to say that.
I
But
think
what are
often
some
what we what we talk about in terms of this idea of difference, to sort of make clear, because it's a really valid thing that we can talk about, kind of how we might understand medical difference, neurologically speaking, because as you said, everyone's different on a very literal level. Our brain is very complicated. There are going to be slight differences in the ways that our brains practically function. Often what we're talking about when we're separating out maybe someone who is neurodivergent from someone who's neurotypical, often the difference that we're really pointing towards is barriers. So often social barriers and sometimes practical barriers that people might experience. And some of those barriers are because the way our brain works means that we're unable to do something which is considered normal. It might impact our mobility. So we generally consider a person of a certain age to be able to walk in a certain way. That would be considered typical. Now, loads of people have very big differences in the way they walk, but we would recognize that someone who has mobility issues experiencing a barrier of some kind. And when we can see that in the workplace, we can think, oh, if we can support someone with those mobility issues, it will make it easier for them to be in the workplace. And so I think that sometimes helps clarify for people what we really mean between when you're neurodivergent, rather than the fact that we are all just different in a sort of very basic sense of that word.
Oh, yes, and that's important. That's why we have the experts to help us understand, because like I said, we pigeonhole people into little boxes and things like that. And sometimes we're just so ill-informed that we're not capable of doing that. We need the experts to tell us exactly, what we're experiencing or what knowledge we need to have, especially when we're talking about people being in the workplace. Maybe they have some differences that they in thinking or have, some sensitivities or different things like that. But it doesn't mean they don't have skills to perform certain duties and certain things in the job. We just
Mm.
make changes to that, is what I'm saying. That yes, I'm enjoying that. So when you're talking about neurodiversity, how do you help us better understand what that really is and the support that is available for neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah, so that can be very different depending on where people are and kind of what is going on around you. For instance, it can be very difficult to get the support that is there in a workplace if your manager is particularly difficult to try and get that support from, possibly. Um, in I mean, one of the big things that I think has really been helpful and part of a really core element of why we are more aware of neurodiversity now than we were, say, 5, 10 years ago, is because people with lived experience have really brought this movement together and shared lots of ways in which that they can support themselves and support other people. I think for a lot of people, this isn't true everywhere, but there are local groups that can be tapped into that can really help us better understand our conditions. In the introduction, you mentioned that one of my conditions I got diagnosed with in adulthood. I was diagnosed with ADHD only a couple of years ago. And as part of the way of better understanding myself and the way that I'm impacted by both my environment in the workplace and personally, was talking to other people with ADHD and hearing what their experiences were and what kind of support they were utilizing. These can be things like technological support. These can be things like gaining certain support, tapping into certain support networks out there. For me personally, this might be things like utilizing a really basic one might be a timer that I might use. I can get very overwhelmed with work tasks that I have to do, and so I might procrastinate more than someone without ADHD, and that might mean that I get behind with work or whatever it might be. So what I might use is putting a timer on. So I, instead of saying, right, I need to get all of this work done and I'm not going to move until it's done, that puts a lot of pressure on me. I get overwhelmed. I don't get around to doing it. What I might do instead is put a 10-minute, half an hour timer, whatever it might be. And I'll say, right, I'm going to work for this amount of time. Then I'm not results driven in that moment. And it means that at the end of the day, what I can do is look back and go, oh, I actually achieved all these different things um, rather than looking at all the times that I was procrastinating or struggling with it. Actually can be a way of supporting us to further access the support we might need. There's a lot of shame and stigma that can be wrapped up with disabilities in general, but also particularly neurodivergent conditions. And so something that can be really difficult part of the process of diagnosis is unlearning those difficult stigma and things. And people utilize a lot of ways of trying to unlearn that stigma. One of them might be therapy. Another one might be learning to be honest about a condition so other people are aware of it, and demonstrating that kind of positivity towards yourself. I also want to hasten to add that there's no one size fits all approach. We're talking about something that has diversity in the name. And when we're talking about diversity, often what we have to acknowledge is people's experiences, even with the same condition, can be very different. And so again, part of lessening the stigma is not going, oh, well, Gregory with ADHD finds this thing really helpful, but I don't. That must mean I'm a really bad person or that I'm never going to be able to do something. It might be that we just need to look for a different technique or a different support system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes brain charity just so important and other, support organizations, because like you said, there's no everybody, I don't know, when people are saying typicals, you're trying to say everybody is the same and we do the same things and we move the same ways. But I'm just thinking about you. You were just explaining what you have to do to try to get, meet all of the challenges on your task to do. And I know I sometimes am so overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. And I'm sitting there procrastinating. And maybe I should set timers. I mean, I put a little calendar thing on there, a little notice thing. Okay, I'm going to call this person here. I'm going to call this person. And then I don't get to it. So now I'm back, behind, and then the stress comes and everything else. And then I don't get any of it done, because then I feel frustrated. And so, I mean, you just gave me a little hint. I'm going to actually put an audible timer on me to make sure that I focus and do the things that I need to do so that I'm not stressed by the end of the day and just feeling like, gosh, what did I do? So I'm not, I don't know. There might be something there that I don't know about, but it's just, sometimes I'm just not organized, or I don't know. But you gave me a little hint that just helped me. Thank you.
Well, that's great. And I think this is one of the things that I find, as you mentioned in the introduction, one of the big things that I do with my job is I go to loads of different types of organizations and I run training for them to help them better understand neurodiversity, neurodivergent conditions, and what we can do in workplaces specifically. Often what we're looking at is what the organization can do for the employee, and might well kind of go about doing that. And what we often point out as a massive positive is it should be enough that it helps your neurodivergent employees. But what we often find is that flexibility, that new perspective, those support systems that help neurodivergent employees. Guess what we find out? They also help those neurotypical employees, or people discover that maybe they were masking to themselves, masking just a term meaning when someone has hidden their neurodivergent tendencies, either consciously or unconsciously. And some people have masked being neurodivergent from themselves, as we mentioned before, because of the stigma, because of all sorts of reasons, or because medically we change our understanding of what these conditions are and who they might include.
Yes. How is the Brain Charity involved in research or partnerships with research institutions?
That's really interesting. We predominantly are not a research institution. However, we have been like a partner organization for a couple of universities, particularly in the UK. We've done a couple of different things. One of them, the kind of studies that we were minorly involved in, was around VR and how VR might be utilized in supporting people who are neurodivergent and people with anxiety. How VR might be used to, I wasn't involved, but my vague recollection is that it was ways of practicing certain environments that people might have anxiety around. For instance, it might be, I think in theory, one way that they tested it was you might get anxiety about asking for something in a shop. And so you would experience what it was like to be in a shop and asking for something in the VR world. So it's a safe environment where you're not having to interact with unknown variables. And then you could practice it before ending up in a real life shop or whatever it might be. So that's one example of something we've been sort of a partner organization. That just means other people are doing the research, but they come in and they sort of liaise with some of our service users who can talk about their first hand experience of using that technology or whatever. Another really interesting piece of work, we're quite lucky. The Brain Charity is based in Liverpool, and there is a Liverpool-based university called Hope University, and they have quite an amazing disability studies department. And another thing that we were kind of involved with, one of their lecturers were partnered with another Welsh university, and they looked at historical disability narratives. So they were looking at historical figures with disabilities and how they were talked about by newspapers and I think medical professionals at that time, and looking at how dehumanizing language has impacted our social understanding, I believe, of how we look at people with disability, about the way their methodology in this research project that they did was talking to people now in the modern time who have disabilities themselves and getting their responses to the way that people in the past were talked about, so that it wasn't a sort of university project that didn't include people with disabilities now and excluding them, as was the case in years gone by, where often people who were directly affected were excluded from having a voice in the research project. So that was another really exciting. I pick up on that one partly because we had this really interesting presentation day at our centre where they kind of presented back a lot of their findings and talked about why they had done it the way they'd done it. And we also were able to host some of the people from the Welsh University to come and report about their side of things as well. So those are a couple of the key ones that I could pick up on.
And and that is one of the things that because I have friends and family members who I would say are neurodivergent, and the bullying in the schools and just some of the negativities that, and it's just unfortunate. I mean, extremely unfortunate that our society is so can be so mean. I don't know any other way to say it. To be mean and to deliberately hurt someone else, knowing that you are hurting them with the names and the poking fun and all of the different things. I don't understand that. But I mean, I didn't grow up that way, but that is one of the things that, I hope at some point in time we all get to a point where we accept whatever the issues are, whether they're disabilities, physical that you can see, or emotional, or whatever those might be. We should be accepting to whatever they are, or however they are, or however they speak, or however their movement is. That's not something to, like you say, poke fun. I remember because I was growing up during some of those years where you had presidents that were in wheelchairs and different things like that, and just some of the things that were said. It was just, we, like you said, inhumane, and to make them feel like they're an other, things like that. One of the things is I wanted to ask you about how does Brain Charity assist families, because there's a family member, but you have other members of the families, and how does that affect the other members of the families, and what do you provide to those family members at the Brain Charity?
I think that's a really interesting point. I think one of the things that we look at, we provide a therapy service as one of the, we do all sorts of things, as I kind of mentioned before. There's a whole broad spectrum of support that we provide, one of them being therapy, and we offer that therapy based on being sort of, you can be a family member of, or someone who's a carer or a friend of someone who has a neurological conditions, because we recognize that it's not just the individual themselves who is impacted, obviously, I guess, or maybe not obviously, but lots of the challenges that are faced by the individual themselves with the condition. But there can be plenty of challenges that face someone as a carer, as a family member. That could be things like stigma, like we were talking about before. And we can also think about practical ways in a very basic sense. If you are a carer for someone, you are probably not going to be financially compensated for that time caring. Now, most of the time, people who are caring for someone else, they're not really looking for financial compensation. They're caring for someone because they love them, or they recognize that support is there and they don't mind giving that support. However, we can kind of, it makes sense to us kind of intuitively that the time you spend caring means that you're probably not going to be making money at work or receiving financial support through other means, predominantly work. So that is something that often we have to consider as being a challenge. Now, these things can fluctuate depending on what benefits are available. In the UK, we have something called the benefits allowance, which is something that if you are a carer for someone, you can be paid a little bit of money to sort of recognizing that you're not going to be able to work at the time that you're caring for someone. Now, there's all sorts of things and that can impact your ability to access that don't have to do with the legitimacy of your claim, but might be to do with whether certain funding gets cut or all those kind of things. And I know there are similar things for you guys in America as well. So those things can be a big challenge at any given time, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about, some of those funds are being cut that are assisting those that are caring for others, whether it's, you know, because of neurodivergency or just some other issues. And, they're cutting funding for these people who are caring for family members. And my heart goes out because I don't know what they're going to be able to do, because they depend on that so that their family member can get the proper care and attention that is needed so that they can be healthy and be happy and things like that. And to now put them all in a situation where there's not finances, well, it's almost like you're punishing someone because of their child. And that's unfortunate for our governments to be even thinking that way, let alone actually doing that. It's just not. Where's the heart? Where's your heart? You know, I don't. This is something else. I mean, maybe my heart's too big, or maybe, I don't know. But I don't know how you can not see and not have the empathy for someone who is trying to do all that they can to make sure that their family member is taken care of and they're supported, and getting what they're needing. And sometimes they're unable to be taken care of by strangers or whatever. And I remember when they had emptied out some of the, hospitals and things years ago, for people who were needing care, and they just became people that were on the streets. So that is not the answer. But that's the way society can be sometimes, when maybe they don't see anything other than their own face in the mirror. But look around, there's somebody else out there that needs your empathy, needs your support, and needs your care. And that's what we're all supposed to be. We're all humans, we're all part of the same family, and we're all on the same earth, and we should be caring for everything and everyone that might be hurting and need a helping hand.
I think you make a great point there, and I just wanted to highlight something you said. And I know there is like a limitation on how effective raising awareness can be about any given topic, but I think often the people who are most marginalized are often people whose voices or their perspective is sort of not available to us at
Mhm.
any given time. And we can see it through across loads of different identities, but we're talking about people who are neurodivergent and people who have disabilities today. I think one of the groups who are often most unable to have their voices heard because of systemic issues are people with disabilities, and often aren't always listened to, or they're kind of shut away somewhere else where we don't have to think about them.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things that we really have to challenge about ourselves is when something we're unaware of something, not coming at it with a sort of I don't know what kind of word, certainty about the topic. Because sometimes, and I can be this kind of person as much as anyone else can be, we have a perspective ourselves on any given topic, and when we hear someone else's topic, a lot of the time we say, oh well, I already have an opinion about this. How
Mhm.
does that feed my opinion, or does it contradict it? And when it contradicts it, often we throw those opinions away. I
Right.
think sometimes we have to be really thoughtful about and I guess, to use a kind of grandiose term, humble. Actually, is this, am I just agreeing with this thing because it's feeding the opinion I already had, or am I throwing this away because it disagrees with the opinion I already have? And I think you talked very eloquently before about the experiences of bullying and how you really didn't understand how malicious people could be. Some of
Mhm.
it is because when faced with an opinion or a reality that we don't accept, we can become very malicious people, and
Right.
quite agitating, I guess.
Mhm.
Going back to the kind of workplace situation for people who are neurodivergent, something that can be very difficult when training people is often when it relates to their own family. They can be very open about it. They can be like, oh, well, my child is struggling in school because they have this condition. But when thinking about a colleague, it can be harder for them to empathize because they don't see the internal world. They don't see the ways in which someone struggles as imminently as with the family situation. And so that's something, it's hard because it's not something that there's an easy hack to solve. But I think it kind of starts with ourselves when we're listening to people or thinking about what other people's experiences are, whether we're being humble or being thoughtful about the ways in which we might try and curtail them sharing their perspective or having them be heard by other people.
Yeah. But the one thing I practice through my lifetime is I always place myself in someone else's shoes. If I place myself in someone else's shoes and saw and walked their steps for a day, I would have that empathy. I used to spend time with the homeless and also working with those that were at the alcohol and drug treatment centers and things like that, and listening to their stories and listening to why the decisions were made, or maybe it was accidental or whatever, or my uncles were alcoholics and I used to not understand what that was. And then when I found out their background of coming back from the war and just some of the things the challenges they faced when they came back, and just the things they went through, I can understand they were trying to just get away from the pain. And so we have to start trying to walk a day in the footsteps of someone else that we're thinking, doesn't deserve your empathy or your compassion. And I think you will find out your heart will change, your mind will change, your attitude, your focus, your perspective will change. Because, it's a little difficult and it's unfortunate because we depend on philanthropy, for, charities and things like yourselves and other charities that are out there that are providing services. And they don't walk sometimes in the shoes of the people that they say that they're trying to help. And they don't really understand. It's just, my buddy did it, so I'm going to give some money too, and it's more of a game than actually doing it because your heart is in it, because you care about the success of that individual. It's a little more than just giving $1. It's about you're making a difference in someone's life. And is that not what we're supposed to do? Be our brother's keepers? We all out there quoting and toting and got so many crosses and stuff all on our cars, and then we'll try to cut each other off of us driving down the freeway. Anyway, that's another show. But it's just having that empathy and taking that walk in someone else's shoes and seeing it from their perspective, not your perspective, their perspective. What are their challenges? You would have a different attitude. You would look at life a little differently, and you would be more than willing to do whatever you can to give a helping hand. That's just that I know that's what it is. We've got to come out of ourselves and see someone else and their struggles. And I think we'll be better, much better.
Definitely.
So what are some of the practical tips or things that advice you can give for managing symptoms of specific conditions?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, it can be quite difficult because there's so many conditions and with all their own sort of unique traits that might come along with them. In terms of a really basic one, what we can see for quite a few of the conditions that we might think about is thinking about the situations that make life more difficult for us. So, for instance, a really common trait of a condition like autism is struggling with sensory overload. That is just to say that the sensorial experience in your environment can be quite overwhelming to you because of the way that your brain processes that information. Now, a really basic thing might be when you find out that you have a condition like autism that impacts your sensory experience, it might make sense of experiences like you've been to a cafe or a shop and you found it really overwhelming. And when you realize it's probably because of the bright lights, the loud music, the crowds, all these kind of different aspects, what we then might want to be thoughtful about is there a way in which I can attend those locations when it's less crowded? I don't know whether this is something that is explored in America, but some of the supermarkets here in the UK, we have a low stimulation hour every week, I think, where the light in some select supermarkets where the lights are dimmed, they don't play music over the tannoys, all that kind of stuff, so that people with sensory difficulties can shop in those environments. So it's things like that. In a very specific sense, if you know someone who might struggle with that, something you might think about organizing is talking to local supermarkets and stuff like that. Again, this might be different in America as it is in the UK, but quite a few supermarkets, local branches of supermarkets in the UK, have something called like community liaisons or something like that. That's a member of staff who they have some interest in relating to the local community. So they might be a good person to reach out to if inquiring about something like that. What else are we kind of thinking about? I think the other thing is around things like emotional regulation or energy regulation. So we might have an expectation that we're going to go and do all these amazing things over the weekend and then kind of hope that we're still refreshed for Monday morning when we go back to work. Quite often that's not how it works, because we've spent a lot of our energy liaising with people, working really hard during the week, and so at the weekend we find that we're really tired and we find that we can't go and do all those amazing social activities that we were wanting to do. So it might be thinking about the way that we manage our time, not just over the course of a day, but over the course of the week. There's one sort of fairly well-known disability fatigue theory called spoons, which is where you imagine your energy as loads of different spoons and you're allocating, say, I think quite often the example is you have 7 spoons of energy in a day and you've got to think every little task uses a spoon. So if I've decided to do one thing in a day and that's going to take a spoon, then that spoon's not going to be there later in the day. And so we might be thinking about the way that we conserve energy and how we prioritize certain activities. If we know I have to do something, I have to go to a dinner later this week because it's someone's birthday and I really value them, I have to be aware that I'm going to have to conserve some spoons for that activity and not use them up too early on. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Oh my gosh.
Of course, as I always say when I go and do training, because there's only a limited amount of time we have to speak about these things, this is a very limited view of what we might think about. I think often the things that make the biggest impact, this isn't about self-management, but when we're looking at the work, things that we can do on a systemic level are the most sustainable changes to make. So if I'm a manager in a workplace and I've got loads of people who come and work in the office, if I know that some people really struggle with sensory overload, then what I might consider is getting a dimmer system put in the office. So it means that we don't have to have all the lights on full brightness all of the time. So when some particular people are coming in, we can turn those lights down a little bit, so it's not going to trigger a migraine, or if someone has epilepsy, lights can trigger that, or if someone has autism and sensory overload might be a thing, we can dim the lights. A real example I'd use here, when working in the office at the Brain Charity, lots of our staff members and volunteers have all sorts of different conditions. That's something we really pride ourselves on, is that people in the organization have first-hand experience. And in one of the offices, one of the colleagues was having a migraine oncoming, and it meant because of the particular migraine she had, if the migraine like sort of happened, her whole week would be gone. She would be recovering because of how extreme the experience of her migraines were. So she asked her colleagues in her office, would you mind if I turn the lights off? Is that going to interfere with anyone's work in here? They were all for it, so they turned the lights off, and it meant that she then didn't have the migraine. It meant that she wasn't then losing a whole week where she wasn't going to be able to do all sorts of things professionally, personally, etc. So that kind of flexibility on the environment itself on a systemic level can be a real make or break for a lot of people with different kinds of conditions. And we can see how finding a way to support someone who is susceptible to migraines also can be a useful way to support people who might experience sensory overload or have other reasons why they're sensitive to light, for instance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And even in the design of the office, you can have different areas where, instead of having the bright lights overhead, you have your own individual desk lamps that you can turn up or down based on what your needs are. So that there is that flexibility, there's things that can be done. And that's why I'm wanting to have this conversation, because I know of people that are very skilled, but they are unable to go in and work in the workplace because there is so much light or things that stimulate the sensories. And so, but we can manage that. Companies can manage that by designing. We have these cubicles. You can design it so that it caters to what those needs are, and so that they can be a part of society and doing their work and bringing their talents and all of their skill sets, to that workplace, and being very successful. It's all about making sure that everyone is successful. It's not always about the bottom line. We are helping others to grow and achieve and meet their dreams. Let's try to do something besides just make money at the bottom line, and then you want to fight and not want to pay your taxes. Stop that. But it's about understanding we have other members in society that want to contribute. Now let's help them to be able to come and contribute. That's all. I think that's a very easy thing to do. Just make it part of your plan. Make it part of, what the organization is about. How about that? I think that would be really a nice thing for us to really start considering, these wonderful people and make them a part of the workforce. And if it means dimming the lights, dim the lights, or have, like I said, the cubes all have their own switches and you can turn those lights on or off. And as far as the music, you don't need to have the music. People have their headphones now. Let them have their headphones. There's no reason to make everyone have to, participate or be a part of that. One of the things I wanted to talk about is kind of difficult, but what are some of the common myths and misconceptions about those that are experiencing neurodivergency?
This is a really interesting question. I'm trying to think of the ones that might be most useful. I guess one that you sometimes hear about that are sort of kind of come back and forth since COVID is this kind of myth around how vaccines cause autism. Now, I try not be too glib about this, because when you kind of work in the industry I do, there's a lot of anger around how glibly people bring this up as a topic, and then how sort of irresponsible this point of view can be. But I think it's really important for us to understand where it comes from. Now, my understanding of this particular myth is it actually originates from the UK. There was in the 90s an article published by a medical journal called The Lancet about, I can't remember what the particular vaccine was. It was, we had like a dual vaccine where you were vaccinating babies for two diseases at once. And this article in The Lancet was arguing that this particular vaccine that has the two that was dealing with two diseases at once was maybe causing autism. Now it got struck off. The doctor behind the thing got struck off because it was very unmedical, and it got redacted from The Lancet. The Lancet withdrew it as a thing. Interestingly, the doctor behind that particular study wasn't arguing for no vaccines at all, but was arguing for a particular vaccine to replace it. not to go
Yeah.
anywhere, basically his own vaccines that he was trying to sell, which
I was
is
gonna
why
say,
he was
he was trying to
undermine.
put some money in his pocket. It had nothing to do with, the care or concern about society. He
I
was
think
trying
that's
to go out and promote and get some money.
I think
Shame.
that's the general argument around
Mhm.
why that was done, because of the way that kind of worked. Now, interestingly, in the UK context, what happened was what is often considered quite an effective public safety health campaign, where there was a lot of when that article came out, skepticism around vaccines shot up for new parents. Very understandable. You see a study that seems to suggest this connection. And then it becomes this kind of big news talking point. Then our government had to put a lot of investment into correcting this misinformation that kind of got out there. And what happened was, after this whole scandal kind of happened, there was more, is my understanding. I mean, I was very young at the time. I think I was a baby myself when this was going on. But when this kind of happened, confidence in vaccines actually increased in the UK after the public sort of health safety campaign happened, after redacting this study. Interestingly, in the UK context, that skepticism only came about kind of back in any sort of force when COVID happened. And because we're an international community, those kind of fears around these kind of things have happened. Now, the reason why I don't want to be too glib about it is because it's understandable that people should be anxious about medicine sometimes, because it can have a massive impact on our lives. I think, though, what we can often do is be too skeptical of sources that try and present fairly reasonable medical information, because we find other alternative information out there that can be very confusing for us, both on a practical level, especially when you don't have a scientific or medical background, where a lot of the jargon might be out of our reach, but also on an emotional level. We want to look after our children. We want to make sure that we don't disadvantage them. The other kind of dimension to this, and I know a lot of people in my life with autism, another element which is quite annoying, to not put too fine a point on it, about this kind of myth, is it kind of suggests that being autistic is a bad thing. Well, we don't want to give a vaccine because what happens if my child becomes autistic? Autism, as you've kind of been alluding to, can mean that people experience challenges in their life. A lot of those challenges are social in nature. That means because of the way people treat you, or because of the social barriers you experience, and not necessarily fundamentally to do with the condition. People experience traits of autism so profound that it would mean that even with a massive social change, that they would still need significant support in many areas of their lives. But that doesn't mean that they don't live a fulfilling and worthwhile life. And I think this is something, another kind of headline myth we often see, is that in some ways people who are neurodivergent, specifically people with autism or a number of other conditions that we might name, don't live as full and joyful and good, whatever we might mean by good, lives. That the only beneficial or good life is the one of someone who isn't disabled, who isn't abnormal in any way, and I think that's a really key thing to sort of highlight there. So it's not just, though it's something we need to be sensitive to, about how we might view certain things where there is an undue amount of skepticism, but also about that kind of overall way in which we view people with disabilities or who are neurodivergent as less than, as not being as fulfilled or as capable, maybe, or whatever it might be.
Well, I just wanted you to get that out there, because I know there is a lot of they utilize information for campaigns, and they utilize information, to otherize people, and it's just misinformation. But if people aren't willing to go and dig and research, and there's a lot of information out there that can let you know that some of that stuff is not accurate, it's not true, but you see people gravitating to just some of the craziest thoughts and ideas that come across. I know they're grasping, looking for a cause, but sometimes there's no cause, there's nothing that caused it. It's just the brain function, and it's just the way it functions, and you're not it's not something that we need to say, oh, woe is me, or poor thing, or something like that. They're very happy people. They're very excited about doing things. They're excited about being a part. And so I'm glad you brought that out, because it's really important. How does the Brain Charity advocate for the rights and needs of people with neurological conditions?
So this is a great question. In the sort of our day-to-day work, we try and support people who are often not supported in other places. I know on sort of individual cases of things, the Brain Charity has made statements about certain things that might be adverse to the lives of people with neurological conditions. In particular, a couple of years ago now, we were involved in a we were trying to raise awareness with our government and trying to get MPs, who are members of parliament. I don't really know what they equate to in the American context, either senators or Congress people. I don't really know the direct equation, but so the Brain Charity was involved in getting MPs signed up to supporting a resolution around better support for people with neurodivergent conditions and with disabilities more generally. And we do some stuff, I was going to say behind the scenes. It's not really behind the scenes, but we do liaise with different organizations trying to find ways in which we can create better systemic support. And what I mean by that is not just these individual instances of saying, oh, well, if you had a better computer, you could do this certain thing, or if you use a certain software, it will read your emails. These are instances of individual support, and they can be really important. But often the things that make the biggest difference with the lowest effort are systemic changes. And so sometimes that's on a governmental level, and sometimes that's on an organizational level in different organizations. And one of the things that was very heartening for me as an experience as a neurodiversity trainer in workplaces, one of the organizations I went to, I had the CEO, I believe he was sat in on the training with his employees. And he kind of said, when we were doing one of our tasks, he was like, I don't want us just to think about our legal responsibility, but I want us to think about our moral responsibility, i.e. there are expectations for organizations on a legal level that they must meet to not discriminate against people who are neurodivergent in the workplace. But he was saying that's not the only standard we're looking for. If it is beyond the legal support, but it is a good or an effective thing to do, we should still be considering that as well. And those are some of the more heartening experiences I've had. Not every experience has been as heartening as that, but that certainly I thought was a really great way to sort of signal that it wasn't just about making sure they didn't get in trouble, but actually about how they effectively support their employees.
How can people get in touch with Brain Charity? What is the email and
so the really
provide that
easy way
information?
to find out about us, the most easiest thing to do is just find our website, which is www.thebraincharity.org.uk. To get to contact us as a first port of call, it's probably info@thebraincharity.org.uk, info at thebraincharity.org.uk. It might be worth checking out the website first, so you can, because there are more specific emails on there depending on what department you want to be in contact with, etc., etc. In terms of our training, that would be training@thebraincharity.org.uk. But you can also find information about that.
Yeah, I highly recommend go out to the website, sign up for the newsletter. They have great stories of wonderful things that the Brain Charity is doing there in Liverpool and in other places. And what message would you like to leave listeners with as far as neurodiversity and the brain charity?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's a really hard thing to encapsulate everything into one easy soundbite, but I think difference is a massive part of it. It's literally called neurodiversity. What we are acknowledging is that people are different from each other, and that our pathways might take different directions than we might have been expecting. Sometimes I think about personal stories as being a great illustration of what we value at the Brain Charity. I always think of one of our volunteers called Rose. She is from Liverpool. She had a stroke a number of years ago now, and she woke up basically with a different accent and a limited ability to speak. And a big reason why I often bring up Rose is because she really typifies a lot of things that I think show why the Brain Charity is so great and why we sort of gravitate towards certain types of people. She got involved, even though she struggles to speak, or at least used to struggles to speak. She got involved and volunteered in our cafe, where she got to every week practice speaking to different groups of people. And though we have loads of people, some of which don't know that we're a charity using our cafe, coming in and talking to our service users and our volunteers, and it meant that people get to see those aspects of life that are often invisible to them. And so that is really, I guess, a key thing that I think helps us to grow as communities, is seeking out difference, seeking out things that are different to us, things that are sometimes not entirely comfortable. And often who I'm talking to when I say this is I'm talking to people who do not experience the issues that people with disabilities experience, people who don't often experience the difficulties that people who are neurodivergent experience. And when you go out and search for that difference, I think it helps open your eyes to those things going on in the world that you would otherwise not know about. And it helps you, as you were saying, you were sort of talking about walking in other people's shoes. That greater empathy for other people helps us to be better to each other. And when we're talking about the workplace, help us to support our colleagues and our employees more effectively.
Yes, absolutely. It's really important. And one of the things is also, if those that are interested in helping to continue this charity doing the great things that it's doing and even helping it to expand, we could sure use, some organizations here to help us in America. Tell us how to donate to the organization.
Probably the easiest way to do that is back to the website itself. Now I believe I'm just going to open in my other screen so I can actually see what I'm telling you to do. If you go to the website itself, there is a big yellow button that comes up on the first screen that you go to. So the same website I mentioned before, thebraincharity.org.uk. And there is a big donate now button. If you click on that, you will be taken to a page where you can donate. You also get to see the very lovely face of Michael Palin from Monty Python, who did a donation video for us a couple of years ago, which was very exciting. So yeah, that's probably the easiest way to donate.
Well, I tell you, this has just been a very, very wonderful topic to discuss and to learn more about this and about the Brain Charity. And I have really enjoyed our conversation, Gregory. This has just been fantastic. It's just been wonderful, very informative. And I would just like to say to those that have tuned in, let's be kind. Let's have empathy. Let's have compassion. And if you're not experiencing these conditions and you may not know others, believe me, there are people out there that need your help, that need your support. Find an organization that supports neurodiverse people, that supports and helps them to get the care that they need. Be a part of the solution, not the problem. Let's be a part of the solution and help our brothers and sisters, friends and family, and everyone else be able to make it and do the things that they want to do in life. This is A Sharp Outlook. I want to thank Gregory for joining me today and having this conversation. And to the others, as usual, A Sharp Outlook is here every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time. And as I always say at the end of the show, stay informed. I want to thank you for joining us on A Sharp Outlook. We have been informed and energized to take the next steps. We have posted links to websites and videos to learn more on today's topic. Please join us again next week for another thought-provoking conversation right here on K4 HD Radio and Talk 4 TV. Listen to the podcast on all the podcast apps. And until next week, stay informed.